Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, An Introduction to GLI University. My name is Megan, and I will be introducing today's presenter. But before that we get started, let's review some housekeeping details so that you know how to best participate in today's webinar. We want to hear from you. What you see here is a screenshot example of the attendee interface that you should currently have up on your screen. You should see this window in your computer desktop upper corner. You can submit your questions at any time during this webinar in the questions pane, and Mr. Toller will do his best to answer your questions as they come in. However, if your question isn't answered, do not worry. He will contact you with a response after the webinar. Although an hour has been allocated to this webinar today, the presentation portion should run about 45 to 50 minutes with time at the end for Mr. Toller to answer any remaining questions that you have, so please don't hesitate. And now it is a pleasure for me to introduce our presenter, GLI's Senior Technical Compliance Engineer, Matthew Toller. To give you a little bit of background information, Mr. Toller is a highly trained and successful GLI University instructor with years of experience, which makes him a really great resource on today's webinar topic, which is GLI University. In his current role at GLI, Mr. Toller is responsible for proctoring gaming technology training, managing forensic investigations, drafting technical regulations, regulatory consulting, and serving as a liaison between regulatory bodies and the various GLI engineering groups. He has facilitated the testing and certification of a wide variety of gaming devices and systems. He graduated from Colorado School of Mines with an electrical engineering degree. And with that, I am going to go ahead and turn the floor over to Mr. Toller. Oops, it looks like we're having a little difficulty on Matt's end. Matt, are you unmuted? There we go.
I should be at this point. Thank you very much, Megan. I do appreciate the introduction there. Folks, we're going to be discussing the importance of effective regulation and education to supplement getting to those effective regulations. A recurring theme throughout our program is that you cannot regulate a technology that you do not understand. Education is not simply about providing new information or reinforcing existing information. It is also a strategic, planned, and measured exercise to bring about change, increase your competitive edge, and/or grow profitability. We design our education solutions to not only deliver these messages, but keep them focused on a continuing improvement cycle. This continuing improvement cycle is very much necessary to ensuring that your operations is as up-to-date as possible with not only the new technologies, but how to regulate those new technologies. As we go through our agenda today, we're going to be touching base on the core curriculums within our brochure. If you folks notice, there is a link right here off to our brochure. I'm going to go ahead and open this up and show you exactly where you can get a copy of that off of our website. Bear with me here while this loads. It takes a little bit of time, and that's okay. You'll probably notice the same thing from your end. I really hope we're not too much further from loading. There we are. So folks, right here on the Services tab, you have an option, and you see it there for GLI University. This is the page that it's going to bring you off to. Once we click on our catalog here, again, this is going to take a minute or so to load to see the e-magazine. And we can go ahead and look at some various pages throughout the brochure. Specifically, I want to bring your focus into our curriculum page. Throughout that curriculum page, what you'll notice is a listing of classes, an estimate as to how long those classes are going to be. We do want to reiterate that every one of those modules is going to be customized on a per contract basis as to how you want them delivered. We can shorten them, we can expand them out. A lot of that's going to be based on your specific requests. So, having said that, now that you know where the brochure is and how you can locate a copy yourself, let's go ahead and spend a little bit of time revisiting what it is we're going to talk about. Bullet point number 1 brings us to our slots basics. This class is the core curriculum. We recommend everybody in the industry take some time to understand the foundations of our industry. We've had folks from as little as 3 days of experience to as much as 30 years of experience go through this class, sometimes even multiple times within a short window. Maybe we had one gentleman that I remember was in our class 4 times in about a 1-year-long period, and I remember asking him, are you getting anything out of this the 4th time? And he said, actually, this is the first time the entire curriculum is finally starting to make sense. It is a lot of information. We do our best to provide an extreme value to yourselves when you do contract for this service. We're also going to spend some time talking about progressive systems, bullet point number 3, accounting systems, so on and so forth. If you need to, we can certainly re-reference back to any of these agenda topics. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the presentation itself. Folks, education has been a key contributor to the advancement of effective regulation and for understanding how that regulation is going to impact emerging technologies. The intent of our program is to provide a broad-based education so that you understand the fundamentals of those technologies and are better apt to respond to patron disputes, the creation of internal controls, even effective compliance policies to ensure that you're not going to run afoul of any of the regulations, rules that do exist out there. So as an example, if we look at this evolution of gaming, if you kind of think about it, in the 80s into the early 90s, EEPROMs were a very driving force in our industry. They were very simplistic. What you might see with an EEPROM is maybe upwards of 4 to 8 megabytes of memory. We all would probably laugh at that today, but that was a substantial amount of memory to accomplish the game designs that existed at that time. Now keep in mind, we're really talking about real spinner games, not your real advanced machines that have video content and are playing movie clips or very elaborate bonus features. Throughout the 90s, we saw the proliferation in our industry of flash memory. We saw CD, DVD, SIM card technologies, PCMCIA cards. All of those pretty much followed the same regulatory structure that you saw with EEPROMs. In fact, compact flash cards, if you think about it, are really just an EEPROM on a new media that is accomplishing the same task that existed within an EEPROM. It wasn't until the early 2000s that the industry really kind of got shook by its feet when we had the advent of hard drive-based machines and those hard drive-based machines starting to proliferate and introduce to our industry. As we looked at those various hard drives, one of the major challenges that existed is most locations had a regulation that required that the program storage media must have a hard write disable capability. Well, obviously with a hard drive, you can write new information to a hard drive almost at will. How did the industry begin to accept the hard drives? We began to lean on an acceptance of a soft write disable. Effectively, the software prohibited the ability for anyone to write to a portion of the hard drive that is being used for an executable portion on the game. Anything that was being written to the hard drive would get quarantined in a partition and would only be allowed out of that partition upon full authentication routines, which typically come from a power-up or reboot function. The next logical conclusion on that specific technology was the advent of server-based gaming and client-server systems. Now you wanted the ability to change the content that existed on a slot machine from the back of the house. To be able to do so, typically you weren't wanting to walk down to the game and change out the compact flash cards or the EEPROMs. It was all being taken care of via hard drives. Let's take the next progression of that same technology and move into mobile-based gaming and internet-based gaming. Of course, we're still going to be using the concepts and the fundamentals of client-server, and now we're introducing a mobile phone or a tablet, an iPad, what have you. As we progress into the year 2016 and as we currently sit here in 2017, the next greatest phenomenon in our industry right now is relative to server-based gaming. So take an example where now we are utilizing a client-server system that is written to a hard drive stored on a server in some location off in the cloud, if you will, that is communicating to your mobile phone, and how well you move the joystick or push the buttons on your mobile phone is going to dictate whether or not you're going to have the opportunity to trigger the jackpot on that particular game or that particular function. Well, if you think about it, your mobile phone might have a cracked screen. Is that cracked screen going to impact the outcome of your game? It very well might. So we're going to touch base on how that would pan out in a understanding of skill-based, and we'll touch base on that at the end of this presentation. Excuse me, folks, jumped ahead there a bit. All right. Let's start with target option number 1, which is our slots basic class. This class is typically offered over an 8-hour window. Throughout that 8-hour window, what we're going to be discussing is the role of the laboratory. Very important to understand not only the capabilities of the laboratory, but the limitations of the laboratory. An example I would like to provide there is I think a lot of our clients would expect that we are testing every possible iteration and every possible outcome on the games that we certify. That is just not simply possible, and that's not how we facilitate our testing services. To give you an example, most games probably require a window of approximately 5 seconds from the time I push play to accept the wager, animate the reels, stop on the outcome, and highlight any wins or losses, and then post those to the credit meter. Instead of assuming that takes 5 seconds, let's truncate that entire experience down to a 1-second window. If we have a game, unlike those old reel spinner games that might only have 500,000 outcomes or maybe 1 million outcomes, today's video-based machines are very likely to have 1 billion outcomes or 1 trillion outcomes. We've even seen games with hundreds of quadrillions of outcomes. This is beginning to get to the point where our brains aren't able to get wrapped around exactly how large those numbers are. So let's redact that to a machine that only has 1 billion outcomes. If we were able to generate 1 outcome per second, every second, it would only take us 1 billion seconds to see all possible outcomes on that game. If you're following along, you might be running some calculations. 1 billion seconds is approximately 32 years. Clearly, it does not take the laboratory 32 years to certify a product. In fact, if that were the case, we'd still be certifying some old products from the early 1990s. So there are some statistical methods and our proprietary expertise that allows us to ensure that these games are going to pay correctly based on how we do our testing services. So those are the kinds of things we're going to touch base in a role of the laboratory. The next area we're going to get into are our testing goals. We're trying to ensure that only background checked and vetted individuals are active players in our industry. Ultimately, players want to have a faith that when they trigger the top award on a game that says they're supposed to get a jackpot, that they're going to get paid a jackpot. Our industry is designed to be clear, concise, honest, accurate, and fair. Any other operation, and we're going to have a problem generating revenue. To help ensure that, not only are all GLI staff background checked on an annual basis, we're going to help ensure integrity through the industry through our testing services. Our testing services we refer to in an in-laboratory environment as a phase 1 testing. When we start doing field services or professional services, those are typically going to come under a phase 2 environment, which is going to involve heading out to a casino and possibly also a central site to facilitate whatever testing is necessary for that particular technology and product. Next in that class, we're going to cover our components of a game. We want to give everybody insight into these machines. If we have the availability, we're going to open a door, we'll start removing the logic board, we'll pull off BBs and printers, potentially backplane boards, button panels, touch screens, anything that is controlled inside that game to give the classroom some understanding as to how those components work, why those components are critical to the integrity of the machine, and really just to provide some experience. If we have audit members that sit through the class, they have probably never seen the inside of a game. Our surveillance team has probably only seen people go inside the game but doesn't know what is a potentially concerning area of the game to get into, which is maybe the logic box, versus an area that they probably shouldn't have too much concern with, say, somebody replacing the ticket stock inside the printer. Next, we are going to jump into a cursory review of slot math. And I say a cursory review because we're not going to jump into all of the nitty-gritty details that we offer in our advanced math principles, which is an entirely separate module, and we will get into covering that as well. What we cover in our advanced math is an understanding, a root understanding anyway, of randomness, a brief description of how par sheets work, ultimately through how the random number generator selects an outcome and maps it back to a display for the patron to see. Throughout this discussion, we're talking about the basics of the math principles. Some of the learning objectives are to ensure that you understand how games work to help resolve patron disputes. I think we've all encountered a patron that has a perception that someone is upstairs monitoring the outcome of their game, that they were just about ready to win a big jackpot when somebody came down to the machine and took it away from them by opening the front door, those sorts of perceptions that exist. We will generally conclude that class with a module relative to the various tools that exist. Those tools can be from GLI Access, which is our website, and how to navigate to the latest version of any particular technical standard, how you can ask questions through our website, to the controlled portion, which requires a username and login password to ensure that we are only providing access to vetted individuals. Through that portal, you can gain access to certification reports. You can see our system verification manual, our device verification manual, our GAT verification manual. The various tools that would exist would be Verify Plus, Cobatron, GAT, ways to signature the game. Really what is trying to be accomplished there is you're trying to assure yourself that the program you have on your floor is an exact replica of what GLI saw in the laboratory when we did our testing. Does anyone have any questions relative to slots basics?
Actually, Matt, this is not relative to slot basics, but GLI University as a whole. It's a two-part question submitted by Jan. Jan wants to know, is there open enrollment or application process for GLI University? And is it possible to obtain your upcoming training schedule?
Yeah, excellent question. So right now, Jan, we do not have any open enrollment classes on the agenda. We are discussing some of those for the latter half of this year. We like to provide everybody about a 3 or 4 month window to be able to attend any of those open enrollment classes. With that, keep an eye out on our events calendar and we'll be quick to post those. I would imagine that our marketing team will be fairly fast to disseminate that information throughout the industry. Most of our contracts are written on a direct request. We will come out to your property and we will host our classes based on the needs that you have requested at that time. So typically that's how we're operating right now, but keep an eye open and certainly we're expecting some open enrollment to be posted in the near future.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Jan.
Excellent, folks. With that, I'm going to move on to our second discussion point. Our second discussion point is relative to progressive systems. So with progressive systems, what we are trying to accomplish is provide an understanding as to the history of progressives, where we were yesterday, where we are today, and where we plan on or expect these devices to be tomorrow. I think if we ask everyone for a definition of what a progressive device is, the generic definition is going to be those games that have an incrementing amount, and that amount is generally larger and posted above the game or co-located near the machine itself. While that would be a very good definition that probably held true 10 years ago, that is just not the case today. Sometimes the nature of the progressive does not increment, it decrements. One of the challenges that the industry has heard over the years is that a player doesn't want to play a progressive immediately after it triggers. They want to wait until it builds up to a certain value because through their experiences it tends to trigger at that certain value. Well, rather than waiting for that accrual, some suppliers have come out with devices that once it triggers, it resets to its highest value, and from each subsequent play, it gets a little bit lower and a little bit lower and a little bit lower. So the root definition of a progressive has changed over the last few years. So some of the topics we're going to get into are a standalone progressive, which is really a single machine contributing to a single progressive amount. We will discuss a linked progressive, whether that's in one location on your floor, i.e. one bank, or you might have multiple banks on the floor contributing to the same progressive. Typically, the best draw for that particular offering is that the award value increases with the number of games that we link to that progressive. So the more games we connect to it, the larger we offer as a one-time award. That tends to attract additional patrons and additional wagering. Through those efforts, there are some concerns that need to be brought up. Are the games that are linked, do they all have an equal opportunity of triggering the top award? If they don't have an equal opportunity, through the odds of triggering the top award, maybe if you make a calculation combining the odds of triggering the top award combined with how much of a wager it would require to trigger that top award, you could come up with some solutions where you put a penny game with a certain odds schedule and a quarter game with a different set of probabilities that when you run the mathematical analysis, both provide the player dollar for dollar wagered, an equal opportunity of triggering the award. The next area we're going to get into are multi-site progressives. Whether this is one progressive being operated across two casinos under your direct purview or control, or maybe you have multiple casinos spread out geographically across the entire nation, the entire state, the entire globe, all contributing to the same award. That is going to depend on your jurisdictional specifications, and how that level of discussion is going to proceed. Again, is generally customized to the individual client. Further, we're going to touch base on mystery awards, the mechanisms behind how mystery awards trigger, and understanding to help guide the patrons so that if you have a game that says this award is guaranteed to trigger by the time it reaches $40,000, how is that clear, concise, honest, accurate, and fair? Well, oftentimes we're going to set a low value, a high value, then a random number generator spins, it selects a strike point, and so that sign is indeed valid because the high value might have been $40,000, and there's no way it's not going to trigger by the time it gets there. That also introduces some interesting questions and concerns relative to what happens if the sign reads 39,990. Yeah, you're going to see patrons wanting to wager on that machine because they know that a progressive is forthcoming in the very near future. Again, are there any questions relative to our progressive module?
Not seeing any. I haven't seen any. Nope. Please, folks, don't hesitate to ask questions.
Absolutely. I'm going to move forward. And folks, again, if the question comes up relative to progressives based on something else I say down the road, don't hesitate to roll the clock back. We can certainly address those concerns as they come forward. All right. The next most likely utilized product within a casino today is the online accounting system. Very infrequently is anyone going down to the game, turning a machine, recording the meter values, and then heading over to a typewriter or spreadsheet application, completing the data entry portion and then generating revenue reports or concluding or conducting audits or maybe looking at specific investigations. Oftentimes all of that data is coming from the back of the house. The various functions that can exist within systems are going to be your monitoring and control systems. These are ensuring that when a door opens that a message shows up that says the door is open on game 1, 2, 3. Some of the other functions oftentimes built into these systems are going to be your player tracking modules. Player tracking is one of those areas that the industry as a whole has come to accept in the absence of very few regulations. I think part of the reason for that is many years ago we were giving away t-shirts, coffee mugs, and that sort of swag. And today it's entirely likely that the property is giving away a points to cash option, where a player is going to accrue a certain number of points based on their wagering activities, and then based on a configuration set by the operator, there is going to be a conversion rate for those points to a cash redemption option. I can either redeem those at a kiosk, or I can go to the client customer service booth or cashier's cage to be able to redeem my points to cash. I think we can all agree that's an area that is potentially going to fall under regulatory purview. If you have a patron that has accrued or believe they should have accrued a certain number of points and they haven't done so, I'm guessing they're going to initiate a dispute, and that's probably going to fall under the regulatory functions to help the property resolve that dispute. We're also going to spend some time talking about ticket validation systems, a brief understanding of data flow to ensure that just because the game bundles a message correctly doesn't mean that that message is going to be recorded correctly in the database, or even if it is recorded correctly in the database, that once you generate your report or conduct your audit or run into your investigation, maybe it doesn't pull the information accurately from the database. Maybe it pulls it and it doesn't report it. There's a lot of different possible failure points in those transactions. We want to provide some insight so, again, you're better apt to be able to perform those investigations and duties customary within our industry. The other types of systems that are going to exist are jackpot systems and server-based and downloadable systems, and we have an entire module on downloadable systems that we're going to touch base on a little bit later here as well. So I'm still not seeing any questions. I'm going to move forward to bullet point number 4, which is our Class 2 gaming systems. Class 2 gaming systems offering is either going to be a 2-hour class offering or an 8-hour class offering, depending on how much information you want to gather relative to the history of Class 2 gaming and the proliferation of Class 2 gaming and the mechanisms behind how these games operate. As a general rule, we have to provide some definitions relative to what Class 2 is versus Class 3. We're going to get into the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act and how that kick-started the proliferation of Class 2 gaming, at least domestically here in the United States. Some international markets still use the same technology, oftentimes just not referring to it as Class 2 gaming. With that, we're going to touch base on how the system works. One of the major changes between a Class 2 game and your traditional Class 3 slot machine is that the random number generator no longer resides at the machine. It resides at a server in the back of the house, and the determinations and decisions that are being made off of that server, and the slot machine, or the client terminal, if you will, is just a monitor. It is just there to display the outcome to the patron. Again, we're going to look at some of the gaming patterns and the gaming probabilities. One of the other important differences that comes up with a Class 2 device is that a Class 2 machine must be based on a bingo pattern. In the graphic that you see in front of you here, you'll notice that there is, in the top of the window, a bingo card, and in the bottom of the window, a slot-like display. We would call that an entertaining display. The ultimate decision as to whether you win or lose that hand is going to be based on the bingo card, and the 777 you're seeing in front of you is, again, just a display mechanism and is not how the decision is made on the game. We're going to touch base on the various models that exist within bingo. You've got instant bingo, bonanza bingo, and then true customized Class 2 bingo for your respective markets. We're going to provide some insight and some knowledge captions relative to what the laboratory does to certify those products and what sorts of internal controls the property might want to ensure they are enforcing, oftentimes through the NIGC regulations, to help ensure that what is being tested at the lab and what is being installed on your floor does not introduce any potential integrity pitfalls. Again, we started this conversation off with an understanding of the capabilities of the lab and the limitations of the lab. It's just as important for the laboratory to understand the capabilities of your regulatory agency and the limitations of your regulatory agency. Lastly, folks, we're going to review various certification reports, how they differ from your traditional slot reports. Within those Class 2 reports, there's some pretty good information as to the patterns, the way that these games pay. Games don't necessarily, are you looking for a BINGO? You might be trying to cover the four corners or create a cross or any other pattern that exists on the machine. Obviously, our math team has to spend a lot of time in ensuring that those patterns are accurate and how that would impact the return to player expectations on that machine with those specific patterns. I am seeing a question there, so give me just a second, I'll review it. Monty, the question relative to module number 2, which was progressive systems. Apologies that I didn't give a timeline on that. Our progressive systems and our online monitoring systems modules are typically offered over a 2-hour window, but again, those can be customized. Folks, if you have any specific questions on these, the recommended timelines are again delineated in that brochure that we showed you on our website, but I will be better apt to try and remember to give you some insight as to how long those particular modules are recommended to take. Thank you very much for the question, Monty. All right, folks, now we're starting to get into module number 5, which is cashless technologies. Well, we start our discussion relative to cashless technologies with the first technology most people saw relative to cashless, which is going to be your ticket issuance and ticket redemption modules. We're going to have a conversation on communication. Most of you have a regulation that requires that the communications must be 99.99% accurate. Well, if your communications were only 99.99% accurate, that suggests that out of every 10,000 tickets that get generated, you would be accepting of one problem ticket. I'm guessing that most of your properties are seeing well more than 10,000 tickets generated in a single day, maybe not all of you, but some of you. That would mean you might have a handful of problem tickets every single day that need to be investigated. Clearly, the communications are much more accurate than 99.99%. During this 2-hour module, we're also going to touch base on the various reporting capabilities, some of the important security concerns that exist within those reporting capabilities. A la, you don't want to provide the validation number in a outstanding tickets report because that could be used as a cheater shortcut as all the outstanding validation numbers and how to generate false tickets and get those redeemed. Lastly, we're going to conclude that conversation with an understanding of how computer security exists, that you probably don't want to leave your servers by the front door, that you want to segregate user responsibilities so that the marketing director can create marketing but maybe not redeem tickets, so that your floor staff can redeem tickets but maybe not assign roles, so that your IT team is limited to assigning roles, those sorts of functions and features. As we progress through the ticketing side, we're then going to transition into true electronic funds transfer, and really the main component that exists between the two of those is the movement of money and how those movements of money are going to exist in electronic format. Obviously, once we start sending electronic transactions, there must be some display at the gaming device to keep the patron informed. There should probably be a message confirmation that if we pulled money out of your house account or if we delivered money from the house account down to the slot machine itself, that those monies and transactions did effectuate correctly or that there was an error and the monies were returned. The error conditions are going to become very important. No longer do we have that tangible piece of paper, a ticket that we can go into the cash box and pull to reconcile the transaction. You have to trust that the logging and error conditions become completely accurate with what we are trying to effectuate in terms of the individual transaction. I'm leaving this a bit generic because there are a lot of different transaction types. That's the kind of thing we're going to go into with that particular module. We probably also ought to bring up encryption at this point. If you're not utilizing encryption in a standard online monitoring and event system, that's probably acceptable. There aren't too many critical functions that are being carried out there that somebody could nefariously mess with if it was not encrypted. However, would you go to a bank or an ATM that doesn't encrypt your message back to your bank to withdraw funds before it pays out at the ATM? I would highly doubt that. We would draw a similar analogy in this class and go through that level of information. There are going to be new meters that increment on the game once you start authorizing either the EFT protocols, which stand for Electronic Funds Transfer, or the AFT protocols, which stand for Advanced Funds Transfer. Each of those is going to have unique meter categories. Those meter categories are going to be delineated based on the various transaction types that are supported amongst those transactions. Okay, folks, lastly, we're going to have to look at the financial and player reports. I think it's reasonable for a player that had put down a deposit in a house account to be able to request at any time what their house balance is and how much money exists. Some of the other questions or concerns that have come up throughout the industry over the years are, do we need to issue monthly statements to the patron, or is just on demand acceptable? Those sorts of questions. Any other questions before we move forward?
Matt, I see a question that came in from Fernando. He wants to know if training can be offered in different languages.
Oh, absolutely. Great question, Fernando. So we have a cadre of various instructors. Some of them are going to have different skill sets and specifically different areas of specialties. We will customize our training to the language that is necessary. Some of the languages that we support right now are going to be in English and Spanish. We do have some staff that are very highly adept in some of the Asian languages as well. So that is a very real possibility in the event that we do not have an instructor that speaks the language that is necessary. We can also look at and investigate simultaneous translation services to help ensure an effective classroom environment. We have utilized that option very many times. One of the only caveats that I will provide to folks is that when we have to utilize that option, typically the timelines that are given either need to expand or the content that's going to be delivered needs to be slightly redacted to help facilitate the three-part or three-phase approach to delivering that information. And if you think about it, you're going to have the presenter, the translator is going to deliver that information, the students or the attendees are going to be able to ask questions, the translator is going to have to translate it, bring it back, and we would proceed forward that way. Okay, folks, hope that resolves the question. We're going to move on to bullet point number 6, which is our bonusing systems. The combination of bonusing systems and promotional systems combined encompass a 2-hour module in and of themselves. Some of the reason that we do so is that these technologies are very closely related and oftentimes intermixed and confused throughout the industry. We want to spend some time, ensure everyone understands the mechanisms, the difference between these. What is a bonusing system? A bonusing system is a derivative of an existing casino feature where you're going to have events show up on the screen that are not based on those that exist in a help screen of a game. One example would be what we have at the bottom of the screen here. A 5% additional bonus is going to show up if you get a poker bonus during whatever configuration time frames the operator entered. They can say that we're going to have a 5% bonus and it's only available between 8 a.m. and noon on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. If I were a patron and I triggered a poker jackpot of $1,000, the machine would trigger a $1,000 reward on the game, and then the system would send another $50 bonus to the machine, and that would show up as a separate transaction. I hope you understand why that would be a separate transaction. If instead of a 5% bonus, that was a 25% bonus, we would have paid the patron $1,000, and then we would have also delivered $250. If those two transactions were combined, aggregated together, that would require the game lockup for a $1,250 reward, and the patron would owe a tax of approximately $200 to $300, and they might say, you know what, I don't want your bonus, please take it back. So instead, we have a $1,000 transaction and a $250 transaction. The types of bonusing systems that we're going to get into are the legacy bonusing. These are essentially your old EFT commands. Multiplied jackpots, we just gave a very good example of a multiplied jackpot. We could get into the advanced fund transfer bonusing mechanisms, and then, much like the progressives that we spoke on earlier, you can have mystery awards based on coin-in contributions. They can be based on games played. They can be based on a number of credits that are wagered. Those are going to be configurations that your team inputs themselves. Concurrent with that same module is our discussion relative to promotional systems. Promotional systems, in a very simple nutshell, are going to be play X, get Y. So play $100, get $5 worth of free gameplay. We're going to touch base on some of the specifics relative to promotional systems, whether they're delivered via a static coupon or whether they're delivered electronically. Typically in a promotional environment, those funds are either going to be completely cashable or those funds are going to be restricted, i.e. non-cashable, and they must be played off on the device that they're delivered to. Your respective jurisdiction probably has regulations that say one way or the other, and if it isn't one way or the other, both of them are most likely allowed. Any questions before I move on to our next module? Not seeing anyone posting a question right now. I am going to move on to our next module, which is iGaming. iGaming is another feature that we offer either over a 2-hour class or an 8-hour class. What we have behind us is a pretty good representation of your typical iGaming environment. You're going to have a player. That player is connected to the primary platform. That's the website that they log on to, if you will. That player is probably going to be provided a number to have a voice on the other end of the phone if some customer service is necessary. Maybe they've lost their password. Maybe they have some questions relative to payment. Maybe they're running into some network lag or other challenges that they want to discuss with the operations team. But what you'll notice is that this is a distributed network. Throughout the primary platform, you'll notice on the right side of the screen that typically connects to a bunch of different game servers. Those game servers are going to be what houses the individual game content. Those servers are also going to be backed up on the secondary server. That secondary server is in case the primary server goes down, you can swap to the other one. Oftentimes it's not geographically co-located, it's somewhere else on the globe. You can jump into that secondary platform, seamless operations. The various third-party vendors you are likely to encounter in this environment are going to be your network operations center to help ensure that IT is working correctly, your business operations center, which are running reports and ensuring that audits are taking place and those kinds of things. We need to ensure the identity of the individual wagering. If any of you have logged into your bank accounts recently, oftentimes they say we're going to also send you an email. Through that email, you're going to get a PIN. Please enter your PIN. You might see a third-party verification like that. Geolocation is extremely important to ensure you're only taking wagers from authorized locations on the globe. And then, lastly, the payment processing folks, which need to ensure that banking transactions are both accepted correctly and then delivered back to the patron as necessary. Folks, within an iGaming environment, some of the areas that are critical to understand are the publicly accessible internet. Patrons need to have access to the internet to be able to wager. What are you going to do for a licensing regime? That licensing regime can go from mild to wild, if you will. There's a lot of different options that exist. Clearly, you're going to need your secure funds transfer capabilities, and then obviously the game software that exists must be vetted and certified by a lab to be operating in compliance. Before we move on to kiosk technology, are there any questions? With that, let's touch base.
It looks like we have one.
Oh, yeah, please. I'm sorry, I didn't see. Oh, yeah, I got you. Sorry, go right ahead, Megan.
It looks like Marian is asking if there is a class that is specific to cybersecurity of gaming systems.
Yeah, and Marian, if you give us just a minute here, I think we're going to cover that in module number 12, which is relative to network risk assessments, which is an overall encompassing security risk analysis and sometimes some ongoing monitoring as well. So I'm going to hold off on that. We'll come back to it hopefully in just another bullet point or two.
Sorry, I think it's Marlin. Sorry, apologize.
Oh, no, you're quite all right. Folks, with that, let's touch base on our kiosk technology. So kiosk technology, again, typically offer over a 2-hour window, is going to encompass all of the functions that exist within a kiosk. That might be a simple bill breaking. We put in a $20 bill, we get two $10 bills out. It might be ticket redemption, which is kind of the most widely utilized application there. It might be our attendant jackpot redemption. Through our attendant jackpots, really what we're talking about is rather than having to have your slot staff walk all the way to the other side of the casino to go to the cashier's cage to get the money, you can network these kiosks within the house system that recognizes, hey, I, as an attendant, just go over, enter my credentials, username, password, PIN. The kiosk can pay it out, issue me the W2G form. I walk over to the patron, get them paid out as quickly as possible because the casino is only making money if the patron's placing wagers. So that's where the function there is going to be. Folks, we're also going to have the possibility of points to cash. And very lastly, ticket issuance. Sometimes those ticket issuance go all the way back to your respective banking network to be able to pay out on the kiosk, so you can see some obvious concerns with that technology as well. Okay, let's keep moving along to the next topic here, which is client-server systems. So we briefly spoke on client-server systems earlier. Again, this is a 2-hour module. Through our client-server systems, we're really starting to lean on the GLI 11-based slot machines and kind of a combination of Class 2, if you will, where there is a random number generator that, depending on which flavor of a client-server system, is either going to reside at the back of the house or it's going to reside on the game itself. We're really talking about a collection of servers for the purpose of being able to control what the patron sees and what the patron is able to play. Whether that's downloading content to the machine or whether that's the machine communicating back to the server to get its outcomes. The two likely environments you're probably going to encounter would be a server-supported environment or a server-based environment. A server-supported would be a one-time download, so we want to change the game from 777s to Cleopatra. We would send the Cleopatra content down to the game. It would remain quarantined until the game crossed an effective idle state. Once it has done so, it will allow that new Cleopatra theme to be playable by the patron on the machine. The difference between that and a server-based environment is in a server-based environment, entirely likely that when I push play on the game, it's going off to the back of the house. The RNG is back there, and the game must be communicating to that server to be able to effectuate the outcome for my specific wager. Next topic is relative to wireless technologies. With wireless technologies, folks, we're going to touch base on the convenience factor. Really, why do you need to run a wire in today's environment? Most of us probably have a wireless router at home. We're used to making purchases on our mobile phones through Amazon. Why is wireless proliferating throughout our industry? Well, some of the examples of how wireless is utilized right now is through handheld player terminals, whether that's truly a mobile phone or maybe you go into the casino and they issue you an iPad or a tablet device that is either preloaded with your monies or is co-located on a game. Either way, I can take that tablet, I can walk anywhere on the slot floor I want, and I can place my wagers that way. Rather than if I go to the casino with a good friend of mine and they want to go to play a poker game and I want to go play a slot game, we both have to go find those games wherever they exist within the casino, and they're probably not co-located. If everything is on a tablet or mobile-based platform, no reason why we couldn't sit together and enjoy the games that we prefer playing. Other good reasons to utilize wireless in a casino are going to be your handheld ticket redemption devices. You got a mobile cashier walking around the slot floor scanning tickets, that kind of thing. You could be updating your progressive displays. Maybe you're looking at sportsbook betting or casino revenue reporting. Heck, most locations these days have a wireless hotspot so that your patrons do have Wi-Fi connectivity to the rest of the world. Again, there's going to be some security concerns that exist there. Behind me is a pretty good example of the client tablet environment, where in this case, Maybe you have a game that the patron is able to insert their money into a game, and once the money's on the game, they remove a tablet that effectively locks the game. It grays out any of the solutions. I'm able to walk along the casino floor utilizing that tablet. The tablet's going to connect to the access point. The access point's going to connect to the server, and the server's going to ensure that the game is locked until we reinstall that tablet back in the game, and then it initializes the ability to transact at the game itself. Any questions on wireless? Megan, I'm not seeing anything in that portal unless I'm missing it.
Nope, I don't see anything yet either.
Perfect, folks. I'm going to move on to our network risk assessment. So hopefully this addresses that earlier question. Typically, both our wireless and our network risk assessment are offered over a 2-hour window. The types of discussions we're going to get into in a network risk assessment class, some of our learning objectives are to help ensure that everyone has an understanding of the risks that exist within the property and that you can self-evaluate your internal controls to see if you're addressing those risks or at least understand the potential risks. Furthermore, through our professional services arm of the company, we have a team that can come out and perform a network risk assessment, and through their network risk assessment, they also have the ability to do constant monitoring of your products, so not just a snapshot in time, it's also an ability to monitor what goes forward. So we're going to talk about the threats and motivations. Why would somebody be motivated to hack into a casino? Well, because casinos have a lot of data, and data has value, even if that value is on the black market. We're going to touch base on some of the breaches and trends that have existed throughout not only our own industry, but other industries. If you haven't heard, there's malware that is now known as ransomware, where somebody clicks on a wrong link, all of a sudden your servers are encrypted, and the only way to unencrypt your servers is to pay someone on the other side of the globe $1 million in Bitcoins to unencrypt your server. Hopefully you have a backup system that you can revert to, and if not, maybe they've corrupted your backup system as well. You're probably going to be purchasing their ransom. And again, you're dealing with the criminal element. There is no guarantee you pay their ransom. They unlock your system anyway. We're going to touch base on the payment card industry data compliance requirements. Ensure that your staff is processing those correctly. One of the biggest motivations for a hacker is going to be getting into the payment network and logging all of your credit card or debit card information that transacts. And again, this doesn't have to be at the slot floor. It might be the information that's coming from the gift shop or from the hotel. We're going to give some understanding as to how we perform a penetration test, what's included in a penetration test, effectively how our team is able to hack into your casinos. The most recent numbers I received for the year 2016 suggested that our network risk team had an above 90% success rate gathering full access to the domain in casinos. What that means is in 90+% of the properties we showed up to, we were able to fully hack in and control the network. That's scary. With that, folks, we're also going to provide some protection strategies. I'll also kind of chime in right now that the folks with NIGC, if you're at a tribal property, will also come in and perform a rudimentary network risk assessment free of charge. So we're going to tell you about all the various options that exist, let you know what your risk thresholds are, and kind of move forward. Does that answer the question relative to how we look into network risk assessment?
Yes, it looks like it. It also looks like we have 2 additional questions that came in.
Yeah, if you don't mind reading those off to me.
All right, so Catherine wants to know, can you tell me if iGaming or mobile gaming is currently implemented in the U.S.? If so, which properties?
Excellent question, Catherine. Right now, it is legalized in the state of Nevada. It is legalized in the state of New Jersey, and I believe Delaware. Do not quote me on that one, but I believe that's the other location that it is allowed right now. With that, there are also a lot of international properties that are authorizing this technology type. one of the primary limitations here domestically anyway is the Wire Transfer Act and the ability to shuffle monies that direction. So yes, it's being utilized on a limited function domestically. Any given change through current administration or specifically through our Congress and Senate might be willing to change that almost at a moment's notice.
Monty is asking, can you give some examples of breaches and trend that GLI has identified? Will this training give the local staff the tools to perform these tests themselves?
Yeah, we don't necessarily provide the tools to do those tasks yourself. We have long tenured staff that are receiving their network certifications. Some of those expire on a 6-month basis. So we have to dedicate significant resources to maintain our certifications in that realm. This is not a service that should be left to amateurs, if you will. So with that, we're not really geared towards training your staff as to how to perform those, although we will certainly have that discussion. We will show them the tools that we are utilizing. But what we are trying to do is enforce that there are risks, and those risks encompass everybody. I think the conception throughout the industry is, well, IT is responsible for monitoring that. Folks, it's not just the IT team, it is everyone that works in the casino. As one example of a recent corruption here, there was a community college in California, based outside of Los Angeles, just in the last month, that their servers received one of those ransomwares, and fortunately they had taken out some insurance to pay for this. Their insurance, whether or not they paid for it, we don't know, but the ransom that was being requested was relatively low. It was only like $20,000 worth of Bitcoins. Another example that was a little bit outside of our industry recently, heck, let's talk about one that was inside of our industry. Last year, there was a very large property, I'm choosing not to name their name purposefully here, that got hacked into, and they had a breach of all of their payment card data. That payment card data cost them not only their reputation, but obviously they had to contact everybody who was breached. More than likely they offered them credit monitoring for the next year and those kinds of things. So there is a true cost for not protecting this data as well. To make matters worse, that specific property was hacked into again 6 months later, and they got new information on the 6-month hack as well. So certainly it has hit our industry. We have a lot of examples that we go through in that class to relay some of these concerns.
Marlon asked another question. He would like to know if there are any casinos that use wireless technology to connect actual slot machines to the gaming systems.
So right now, most of the slot machines are autonomous and they're not connected to the gaming systems themselves. We would really need to be talking about a client server machine that is also connected to the server in the back of the house. Typically, those are going to be a download capability, not a full server-based capability. So very limited proliferation there. I will tell you, I have personally encountered kiosks that are wirelessly connected. We've seen ticket redemption devices that are wirelessly connected, and you also have, like sometimes the pit boss has a tablet that they're able to add player points or those kinds of things. So there are integrations to the house accounting system, not necessarily the systems that control the outcome on the game, because like I said, typically those are going to be relative to the game itself. Great questions, folks. This is spectacular. I realize we're getting pretty close to the end of our allotted time, but we've asked a lot of questions and hopefully we've provided a lot of insight. Any other questions before I move forward to our next topic?
Looks like that's it for right now.
Right? Oh, let's do so. So our next topic gets really interesting. Now we're talking about forensic procedures. With our forensic procedure, the brochure lists a 2-hour module, but I will also let you know the company has created what we are calling an advanced forensic procedure. It is not in any of our brochures yet. That must be taught in a controlled environment, because what we do for that 4-hour module is we go through a very advanced source code review. Through that source code review, we tell you essentially how you cannot replicate the nature of the issue that you would experience in the casino. We have to use our proprietary tools that are able to step through, know where the transaction is. Essentially, the timing window to recreate this is extremely small, maybe 20 to 40 milliseconds. So our tools will allow us to do so. We'll go through an understanding of the various counting mechanisms within computing protocols. That's binary versus hexadecimal, why some of those hexadecimal messages matter, and that potentially that's what led to a forensic. So what are we trying to accomplish in a forensic? What are the learning objectives? We are trying to determine the cause of a malfunction or resolve the nature of a patron dispute. So folks, really it is that simple. You might have a patron dispute for a nickel. That patron dispute is really a potential tarnishment of your reputation. You want to get to the bottom of that. Very quickly, operations is fast to say that's a malfunction on a gaming machine. What if you have a very educated patron that says that's not a malfunction, that's a coding error, that's a program flaw, that's something else? If you end up in a courtroom, you need to be able to substantiate that information. You would submit to the laboratory. The laboratory would perform our features, our functions. That's based on a service contract we would provide to you. We're trying to give you insight to these so that, one, you don't encounter them if you can prevent them, and two, in the instance that they are unpreventable, how you can best respond to that instance to help ensure the laboratory is able to provide as best as we can a conclusive reason for that. We do not provide any guarantees throughout forensic service that we're going to get a conclusive result, but we do try our best. So the base class is 2 hours, that advanced module is 4 hours. Please let us know if that's something that you're interested in pursuing. Lastly, folks, we have what I'm going to call a bit of a surprise, our advanced math principles. I only say it was a surprise because we put it on our brochure about 2 years ago, and for the data that we collected last year, this was next to our Slots 101 class, this was the most highly instructed module that we offer. You probably won't believe me, but the way that we step through this, even if it's late on a Friday afternoon, we've had people stick around after 5 o'clock on Friday with smiles on their face, laughing and giggling as we go through some of the case study examples. So what are we going to discuss in this class? We're going to discuss RTP calculations and how we get to those calculations. We're going to look at doing some meter reconciliation examples and providing mock audits, if you will, from a very rudimentary standpoint. We're not going through auditing your floor. We're giving examples which meters should increment, why should those meters increment, what happens when a specific transaction occurs, and which meters should be the ones to move forward or progress. We're going to spend some time talking about progressive math and how if you make a misconfiguration with your progressive, it might entirely bring that game over 100% RTP. As a quick example, if you have a 95% RTP machine, and that machine does not take into account the incrementation rate on a progressive, and instead of putting a 1% progressive rate, you put a 10% incrementation rate on that progressive, you've now taken that game from 95% RTP to 105% RTP. It's going to be very popular and your patrons are going to appreciate playing that machine. The casino is going to lose money and you're going to have to account for why that misconfiguration took place. We're going to take a very deep dive into device volatility. So these machines, if you think about it, on average hold roughly 90%. Who would show up to a casino, hand over a $90 bill, and watch them count out 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, $90, thank you for coming to the casino? That's not a very fun experience. So the games must have instances where they pay out a lot and instances where they pay out a little. Throughout this module, we're going to tell you some of the mathematical tools that exist to help in an investigation to see if your game is behaving at what would be an acceptable variation based on the number of plays that have taken place. We'll give you all of the tools to be able to perform that analysis. Next, we're going to get into a discussion as to the principles of random number generators and how a random number generator operates, some of the important definitions of a random number generator, and the operating understandings. We're not taking a PhD level deep dive into how RNGs work. We're trying to give a layman's understanding so you're better prepared to answer those questions should a patron wager them to you. With that, the next topic there is games of skill. And folks, I mentioned earlier that is a monumental shift in our industry. Really, if you will, bear with me, and as an example, why couldn't Candy Crush be a slot machine? And how well somebody moves that joystick, or if you're playing a military combat game, hits the jump button or shoots their weapon, or maybe you're playing a trivia game like Jeopardy, and how well you respond to the answer is going to dictate whether or not you get paid. A whole new way of looking at our industry. We're going to take a cursory understanding of that in our advanced math class. And folks, throughout this class, we have a suite of case studies that we will go through. Those case studies are going to be catered to your individual students. It is our instructor's responsibility to kind of feel those students out and see which of those case studies is going to be most applicable to the knowledge level that is exhibited. Typically, this class is offered over a 4-hour window. I see a new question here that I'm reading. Give me just a second. The question that I'm seeing from Jessica is to ensure that our class is relative to the processes and operations inside of a casino and not the GLI cloud technology. GLI Cloud, which is now known as Iris, is really a inventory tracking tool. That is a module, or a tool that the company offers, but that is not the focus of our university program. The focus of our university program is, again, going back to the cliche, you cannot regulate a technology you don't understand. In most instances, we have either written the regulation or we have been consulted in the rule writing phases, and we understand why those regulations are there and how they impact operations. Our focus is to ensure that everyone understands why those regulations exist and how to best ensure compliance with those policies. So almost exclusively, our program is written towards your internal operations, not that specific tool that deals with inventory tracking purposes. Megan, any other questions before I move into our last bullet point here?
Yes, Mario wants to know if he'll receive a completion certificate after taking a GLI University course.
Great question. I wasn't, for some reason it had slipped my mind. Mario, yes, absolutely. After the conclusion of each of our modules, we issue a certificate of completion to any attendees. We base that on the sign-in sheets. We'll work with the lead on your end, if you will, to ensure that all the names are spelled correctly and that kind of thing. If the nature of those certificates must be customized, we can customize them as well. We've had clients come through that say, hey, we must provide proof that our students or our employees, have received 25 hours of training. You guys were out here for 4 days. That was 32 hours. Can you please put 32 hours of training on the certificates? We absolutely accept those requests as well. So folks, we have now at this point gone through everything that is described in our brochure plus a little bit more. In front of you, you have custom modules that we have created on an individual basis for specific clients. I made mention of that first bullet point there, which is advanced forensics with a live source code review. We also have modules geared towards anti-money laundering and the combating of financing of terrorism. With that, we will not only provide classwork, we also have a professional service that would perform an audit for that if you're interested. We have an entire module geared towards skill-based gaming, this new phenomenon, and how it's going to change regulatory functions. Folks, if you think about it, and I'm playing Pac-Man, how well I move that joystick is going to dictate how well I get paid. Is it reasonable that a patron can initiate a dispute that when they move the joystick left, Pac-Man did not go left, he just sat there? Yeah, absolutely. And so how are you going to effectuate that? That's, up to your individual jurisdictional requirements as to what you're going to mandate in terms of game recall. Maybe you're going to mandate like a flight simulator kind of game recall, or maybe it's all text-based that says button press was received at this time and this date. Some of those questions are still yet to be resolved throughout the industry. Some of the reason for that, folks, is the very first skill-based games only started being placed in the industry as recently as 3 months ago. So there are very few games throughout the industry today, but I can tell you from the perspective of GLI, we have in excess of 10 other submissions in process that we're trying to get through all the regulatory hurdles, in addition to the 4 games that have been certified right now. So expect the rate of proliferation to increase greatly over the next 12 to 18 months for sure. We have offered games relative to protocols, whether that is the SAS protocol, the G2S protocol, the S2S protocol. Every one of these custom modules, folks, can be customized to your requests. We've offered the protocol class over a 2-hour window. We've also offered that protocol class over a 3-day window. Obviously, the 3-day window is kind of a nerd level understanding. We're taking a very, very deep dive into the individual transactions and what an acceptable response would be there. We have created classes relative to random number generator implementation, threats, and testing methods. That was a 1-week module we created for a specific client, at least the one that's in my head, all about RNGs. We created a 1-day content relative to authentication routines and how machines boot and how they ensure they're only executing from authorized code. We are currently in the process of designing a support system module for a client that's going to be delivered in about 2 months. So folks, ultimately the message that we're trying to relay here is if the solution that you're looking for is not on our brochure, please contact us. We'll be glad to provide some quotes to spin some custom modules for yourselves. Specifically as it relates to skill-based gaming, folks, we think this is going to be very highly utilized technology in the industry. If it's something that you would like to learn more about, we have some discussion points that we have planned at the Regulators Roundtable, which is being hosted in, I believe, about 3 weeks. There are some breakout sessions relative to skill-based gaming, and I know that's going to be a topic of discussion. I'm quickly reviewing if we have any other questions here. Megan, I'm not seeing any unless you are.
No, I don't see any on my end.
Folks, greatly appreciate not only your attendance, but your level of questions and participating with us an extra 10 minutes. Do realize we ran over, but hopefully we provided a lot of insight to yourselves. I would encourage you to contact myself directly if you have any questions on the offerings, or if you would like to bring our team out to your location, or if you would like to bring your team out to our location. In addition to that, your client services representative is also very aware of these offerings, and I would encourage you that that's another potential resource for you to reach out to have that conversation. With that, folks, I'm not seeing any other questions or concerns. We greatly appreciate your attendance here. We want to leave you with the notion that you should leave nothing to chance. The laboratory is here to help. Thank you very much for your attendance.